He walked through the door expecting silence, but what he saw made his knees give way. A billionaire, reduced to tears, all because of what the Black Maid did for his dying father. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will restore your faith in humanity and remind you that kindness often comes from the most unexpected hearts. The sound of tires screeching on the long, cobblestone driveway broke the stillness that had hung over the Williams estate for months. It was a cold Friday morning when Ethan Williams, billionaire tech mogul and youngest self-made CEO in New York, returned home unannounced. The city knew him as ruthless, a man of spreadsheets and skyscrapers, of iron logic and impossible standards. But behind the perfect image was something fragile he hadn't dared confront in years, the home he had abandoned, and the father he hadn't spoken to in almost a decade. Ethan had left this mansion when his mother died, swearing never to return. But now, a message from the family lawyer had shaken his entire world. Your father's health has declined rapidly. You should come home before it's too late. He wasn't ready. Billionaires weren't supposed to cry. They were supposed to control emotions, not drown in them. Yet, as the heavy oak doors opened, he felt an unfamiliar chill crawl down his spine, not from the weather, but from the memories buried in those marble halls. The mansion smelled different now, no more expensive colognes or fancy dinners. Just the faint scent of disinfectant and freshly baked bread. The sound of soft humming echoed from the kitchen, a voice gentle but soulful, like an old gospel tune carried by the wind. Ethan frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone else in the house. Hello, he called out. No answer. He followed the sound, slow, melodic humming that drew him like a thread through time. When he reached the kitchen, he froze. There she was, a black woman, middle-aged, wearing a simple blue maid's uniform, her hair wrapped neatly in a scarf. Her back was turned to him as she wiped down the counter and stirred something on the stove. The sunlight from the wide window hit her face just enough for him to notice the lines, the kind of lines carved not by age, but by life itself. Who are you? Ethan asked sharply. The woman turned, startled, but quickly regained composure. Oh, you must be Mr. Ethan, she said, her voice calm and warm. I didn't know you'd be home this early. You didn't answer my question, Ethan said, his tone clipped. Who hired you? My father doesn't take strangers in. She smiled faintly. He didn't. I offered to help. Ethan frowned. Offered. What does that mean? It means I wasn't hired. Not at first. She paused, stirring the soup again. Your father needed someone, Mr. Ethan, and I needed a purpose. He blinked, unsure what to make of that answer. You're telling me you've been living here without pay? She laughed lightly, the sound genuine. Oh, I get paid, just not with money. Something about her answer irritated him. He'd spent his entire adult life believing everything had a price: loyalty, love, trust, even time. The idea that someone would work without money didn't fit anywhere in his world. What's your name? He asked finally. Grace. Grace Bennett. That name lingered in the air, like a whisper that somehow carried more weight than the marble walls around them. Ethan nodded slowly and turned toward the living room, but her next words made him stop. Your father's been waiting for you, Grace said softly. He stiffened. He knows I'm here. Grace smiled gently. He always knows, even when he pretends he doesn't. The next morning began with the sound of birds, something Ethan hadn't heard in years. City life had conditioned him to alarms, conference calls, and the dull hum of machinery. But here, at the Williams estate, nature dared to exist unbothered by the noise of the world. He stood at the balcony of his old bedroom, gazing down at the sprawling garden his mother once adored. The flowers were alive again. Hydrangeas bloomed in neat rows, lilies framed the fountain, and rose bushes stretched toward the sunlight like they had been waiting years to breathe again. Someone had been taking care of this place. Ethan's jaw tightened. Grace. He dressed in silence and made his way downstairs. The house was spotless, not the kind of sterile, lifeless clean he was used to, but lived in clean. A home that felt warm. He found Grace in the garden, kneeling beside a rose bush, wearing gloves and humming that same hymn he'd heard the day before. You did all this? He asked from behind her. Grace looked up and smiled, squinting slightly in the morning sun. They were dying when I got here, she said simply. But flowers don't die because they're weak. They die because no one's been talking to them. Ethan blinked. Talking to them? Grace chuckled. Oh, yes, plants feel love, Mr. Ethan. They know when someone cares enough to notice them. He crossed his arms. You sound like my mother. Grace's smile softened. She said that too, you know. Every flower has a soul. That hit him unexpectedly hard, like a ghost had whispered through her. His mother had said those exact words years ago, back when she used to teach him how to plant daisies by the fountain. But how could Grace know that? Before he could ask, Grace stood and dusted off her hands. "Your father's awake now," she said. "He's been asking for you." Ethan hesitated, his pulse quickening. He hadn't spoken to his father in 8 years. Their last conversation ended with shouting, slammed doors, and the kind of silence that hardens into stone. But now, the old man was frail, his strength fading with each passing day. When Ethan entered the study, the sight shattered him. His father, George Williams, once a towering figure of discipline and power, now sat hunched in a wheelchair by the window, his hands trembling as he tried to turn a page of an old photo album. "Dad," Ethan said quietly. The old man didn't look up at first. Then, slowly, he turned his head, eyes clouded with time, yet sharp enough to recognize the one voice he'd never forgotten. "Ethan," George rasped. "You came back." Ethan nodded, unable to find words. "Yeah, I heard you weren't well." George's lips twitched. "That's one way to put it. The doctor says I've got months. Maybe weeks." The air felt heavy. Ethan swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" His father smiled bitterly. "Because you were busy being important. And I was busy being proud." There was no anger in his tone, just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from holding grudges too long. Then George's gaze shifted toward the garden visible through the window. "You met Grace, didn't you?" "Yes," Ethan said cautiously. "Who is she really?" George's expression softened. "An angel, maybe, or a storm. She showed up after I fell last winter. No one else came, not even the nurses you hired. But she did, said she'd take care of me, till God told her to stop." Ethan frowned. "And you just let her?" His father chuckled weakly. "Son, when you're lying on the floor, bleeding and alone, you don't ask for resumes. You just thank whoever picks you up." Ethan looked away, guilt tightening his chest. He wanted to argue, to say he had sent people, paid bills, managed care, but deep down, he knew his father was right. Money had replaced love. Convenience had replaced compassion. "Grace doesn't talk much about herself," George continued. "But every morning she prays with me. Every evening she reads your mother's old letters aloud. She even fixed the old piano, said music helps the soul remember." Ethan turned sharply. "She reads Mom's letters." His father nodded. "She said your mother's words shouldn't stay trapped in drawers." That was it. Ethan couldn't stand it. This woman had stepped into their home, into his family's history, and somehow made herself part of it. He stormed out, his chest burning with confusion and anger. In the hallway, Grace stood waiting. Almost like she knew. "You've made yourself quite at home here," Ethan snapped. "Touching my mother's things, reading her letters, who gave you that right?" Grace looked at him calmly. "Your father did. And she did too. She's dead," he bit out. Grace didn't flinch. "Dead people still speak, Mr. Ethan, you just stopped listening." That silenced him. Her words pierced through every layer of arrogance he'd built over the years. For a moment, he wanted to yell, to reassert control, but instead, he turned and left the house. He needed air. He needed logic. Something real. As he walked down the long driveway, his phone buzzed, his assistant calling about a board meeting. He almost answered, but then he noticed something near the gate, a small wooden bench under an oak tree, and a pile of fresh flowers laid neatly there, along with an old photo of his parents smiling. A note rested on top. "For every moment you missed, love still waited." He knew Grace had placed it there. But why? That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but not empty. He wandered into the kitchen, where he found Grace again, this time sitting at the table, sewing a torn sweater. "Do you ever rest?" he asked. Grace looked up, smiling faintly. "Rest is for those who have nothing left to do." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Why are you really here, Grace?" She set the needle down. "Because I made a promise." "To who?" Grace hesitated. "To someone I loved, and lost. Years ago." Ethan frowned. "And what does that have to do with my father?" Grace took a deep breath. "Your father saved my son's life." Ethan blinked. "What?" She nodded slowly. "It was long before you left home. My boy was 12, bright, but sick. He needed surgery I couldn't afford. Your father paid for it quietly. Never told anyone. He just showed up one day and said, 'Every child deserves a tomorrow.' I promised him that if I ever had the chance, I'd return the kindness. So when I heard he'd fallen ill, I came." Ethan stood speechless. All the anger drained out of him, replaced by something else, shame, awe, and a growing respect he couldn't yet name. Grace smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes. Your father didn't just build companies, Mr. Ethan. He built people. I'm one of them. The words lingered like a hymn. Ethan looked at her differently now, not as a servant, but as someone who carried something sacred. Still, a question gnawed at him. Why didn't you tell me? Grace's voice broke slightly. Because you wouldn't have listened. He had no comeback. She was right. The Ethan Williams who left this mansion 8 years ago wouldn't have cared. But something was shifting inside him now, slowly, painfully. Grace, he said quietly. Thank you. She smiled, then whispered, don't thank me yet. There's more you need to see. The next morning, Grace led him to the garden again, this time to a small hidden shed at the edge of the property. She unlocked it and motioned him inside. Dust hung in the air, but sunlight streamed through cracks in the roof, illuminating dozens of paintings, canvases lined against the walls, each one depicting his family. His mother by the piano, his father reading, himself as a boy, playing under the oak tree. Ethan's throat tightened. Who painted these? Grace pointed to the largest canvas, a recent one showing George in his wheelchair, smiling beside her. Your father, she said softly. He paints when the pain gets bad. Says it's how he remembers life. Tears blurred Ethan's vision. He'd spent his life collecting things, companies, cars, awards, yet somehow, his father had been collecting memories instead. Grace had given him the space to do it. Then Ethan noticed something else, a small covered painting in the corner. What's that one? He asked. Grace hesitated, then lifted the cloth. Ethan gasped. It was a portrait of his mother, but she was holding his son. Except, he didn't have a son. Your father started this one after your mother died, Grace whispered. He said it was what he wished to see, the grandchild he never met. Ethan stared at it, tears streaming down. He painted a future he knew he'd never have. Grace nodded. Hope doesn't need to be real to be powerful. At that moment, Ethan realized, his father wasn't waiting for him to take over the empire. He was waiting for him to come home. That night, Ethan sat beside his father's bed for the first time in years. They talked about everything and nothing, the weather, the company, old memories. When George drifted to sleep, Grace quietly entered with a blanket and covered them both. Her hands trembled slightly, as if holding back something more than exhaustion. Outside, the storm rolled in. Thunder rumbled over the hills. Lightning flashed, illuminating the photo of Ethan's mother on the nightstand. Beneath it, tucked in a frame, was a letter addressed to Grace Bennett in his mother's handwriting. Ethan picked it up, his heart pounding. He turned to Grace. You knew my mother. Grace froze, eyes filling with tears. Yes, she whispered. She was my friend, my sister in faith, the one who believed in me when no one else did. Ethan's mind reeled. You were here, even before all this. Grace nodded. Long before. She's the reason I ever came back. The truth hit him like a wave. Grace wasn't just helping his father, she was fulfilling his mother's dying wish. And in that storm-lit room, Ethan finally understood what kind of love could make a billionaire cry. Morning came quietly, as if the world itself didn't want to disturb the peace that had finally settled in the Williams mansion. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain, fresh, heavy, and cleansing. Ethan stood by the window in his father's room, watching Grace prepare breakfast on a small tray. Her movements were steady, graceful, every motion deliberate, every breath gentle. George Williams was weaker now. His breathing shallowed through the night. But he still smiled when he saw Ethan beside him. Didn't think I'd wake up to see you here again, he rasped. Ethan managed a faint smile. Guess I ran out of excuses. George chuckled, the sound fragile. That's good. Excuses keep us lonely. Grace placed the tray beside the bed, her eyes warm. Time for your medicine, Mr. Williams. He looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. Grace, I think I've had enough medicine in this lifetime. What I need now is peace. She reached for his hand and held it, nodding silently. Ethan watched that gesture, simple, yet powerful. He had seen millions flow across his accounts with less meaning than that touch. When Grace stepped outside to get some fresh linens, George turned to Ethan. Son, he whispered, promise me something. Ethan leaned closer. Anything, Dad. Don't forget what love looks like when it's humble. I built my fortune thinking strength was loud. But Grace, she showed me strength is quiet. Ethan swallowed hard. You really care for her, don't you? George smiled faintly. She's the best part of what your mother and I ever believed in. There was a pause, long and heavy. Then his father's hand trembled. Ethan, the letter under your mother's photo. Read it when I'm gone. Don't say that. But George's hand tightened weakly over his. Promise me. Ethan nodded, eyes burning. I promise. That evening, the sky turned gold, the kind of sunset that seemed to hang in memory forever. Ethan and Grace sat by George's bedside as he drifted in and out of consciousness. She read softly from the Bible, her voice carrying verses like lullabies. When she reached the end of Psalm 23, George smiled faintly. That one was your mother's favorite, he murmured to Ethan. Grace brushed his hair back gently. She used to say heaven wasn't far, just unseen. George closed his eyes. Then I'm almost there. The room fell quiet. The only sound was the steady ticking of the old clock. And then, somewhere between one breath and the next, George Williams was gone. Grace bowed her head. Ethan froze, disbelief, grief, and love all colliding in one impossible moment. The man he had hated, envied, and longed for was gone, leaving behind a silence louder than any argument they'd ever had. Grace reached for Ethan's shoulder. He's at peace now. He nodded numbly. He waited for me. Yes, she whispered. He always did. The days after the funeral were a blur. Cameras, statements, condolences from business partners who never knew his father's laugh. The estate was full of flowers and strangers. But the only thing Ethan noticed missing was Grace. She'd vanished. Her room was empty. Her few belongings, gone. Only one thing remained on the kitchen table, a folded letter with his name written in her careful handwriting. He opened it slowly. Greater than Mr. Ethan, I've done what I came to do. Your father is with your mother now, and my promise is fulfilled. You asked once why I stayed. The truth is, I owed your family more than I could ever repay. Your mother saved me when I had nothing. She took me in when the world had shut its doors. She told me I had a purpose, to heal, to serve, to forgive. She made me believe love could rebuild what life had broken. When your father helped my son, he told me that debt was settled. But it never felt settled to me. Love doesn't work like numbers on a ledger. So I came back, not to repay a debt, but to keep a promise, that none of you would die alone. If you're reading this, it means my purpose here is done. Don't chase money so hard that you forget to live. Build something that breathes love, not just profit. Grace Bennett. Ethan stood motionless, tears streaming down. The letter slipped from his hands, landing beside the family photo of his parents. Then he saw it, a second envelope tucked beneath. His father's handwriting. Greater than my son, if you've found this, Grace has gone, just like your mother said she would. You see, she wasn't just a maid. She was the reason your mother believed we still had good left in the world. When your mother was sick, Grace was there every day. She held her hand when I couldn't. She prayed when I wouldn't. She gave her blood for the transfusion that saved her once, yes, her blood. That's how your mother survived those last months. They were sisters in faith, bound not by blood, but by choice. When I grew bitter after your mother passed, Grace stayed. She watched over me from afar until she saw you needed her too. That woman has carried our family longer than we ever realized. Don't let her kindness end with us. Carry it forward. Ethan sank to his knees, sobbing. For the first time in his life, money, pride, and power meant nothing. He realized what his father had meant, what love looked like when it was humble. Weeks later, he found Grace again. Not in some far-off city or expensive resort, but at a small community home on the outskirts of town. She was in the garden, surrounded by children, teaching them how to plant flowers. Ethan stood quietly at the gate, watching. She looked up and smiled, as if she'd been expecting him. I thought you left for good, he said, his voice breaking. I did, she said softly. But good doesn't end, Mr. Ethan, it just finds new places to grow. He approached slowly. You were right about one thing, he said. I stopped listening. To my father. To life. To love. Grace touched his arm gently. You're listening now. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I came to thank you. She smiled faintly. Then don't thank me with words. Thank me by living. He looked around, at the garden, the children, the peace. Maybe I could help here, he said quietly. Grace laughed softly. You don't belong in dirt and mud, Mr. Billionaire. Ethan smiled for the first time in a long time. Maybe that's exactly where I belong. And from that day on, he did. He built a foundation in his father's name, funding homes, schools, gardens. But he named it not after himself, or even his family. He named it, the Grace Project. Years later, at the dedication ceremony, reporters asked him why. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Because once, a woman taught me that wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give." That night, when everyone left, Ethan returned to the old mansion one last time. He walked to the garden where his father's ashes were scattered and placed a single lily there. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. "And thank you, Grace." The wind carried the scent of flowers through the air, and somewhere, in the echo of memory, he thought he heard his mother's voice, "Every flower has a soul." Ethan closed his eyes and smiled. For the first time in his life, the mansion didn't feel empty. It felt like home. A billionaire came home unexpectedly, and cried when he saw what the Black Maid did for his father.